Theodore Roosevelt, The Great Adventure of Leadership. Theodore Roosevelt said, "There is always a tendency to believe that 100 small men can furnish leadership equal to that of one big man. That is not so. Nothing can fully take the place of the indispensable work of leadership." Theodore Roosevelt was the one big man who set the pattern for presidential leadership in the 20th century. Theodore Roosevelt was born on October 27, 1858. After he graduated from Harvard, he entered into politics. He served 3 one-year terms in the New York State Assembly. After his first wife died, he went out west and traveled as a cowboy and a rancher. It was during this time that he wrote 3 books about cowboys, which really shaped the modern image, or how America really viewed modern cowboys. When he returned, he campaigned for Benjamin Harrison, and Harrison gave him a job as the head of the Board of Police Commissioners in New York, where he reformed the police department in New York City. After this, he became the Secretary of the Navy. But when America entered into the war with Cuba, into the Spanish-American War, he resigned this post to form the Rough Riders to fight in the Spanish-American War. Roosevelt always said that was his one big regret, that he was not injured in the Spanish-American War. When he returned from the Spanish-American War in 1898, he became governor of New York, but the Republicans convinced him in 1900 to run for vice president under McKinley. He wasn't vice president long, because in 1901, McKinley was assassinated and Roosevelt became president. During his presidential time as president, he made many reforms, which we will talk about later, but one of the biggest advancements that Roosevelt is known for is that he built the Panama Canal in 1903. In 1904, he was elected president for another term, and in 1906, he won the Nobel Prize for Peace for his work on the Treaty of Portsmouth with Russia and Japan. In 1908, he had promised not to run for another term, and he knew he could not stay in the United States and remain silent in politics, so he decided to go on an African safari expedition, and while he was there, he collected over 1,000 specimens for the Smithsonian Institution and the Museum of National History. When he came back, he saw that his successor, Taft, had not kept many of the campaign promises that he had made. So in 1912, Roosevelt decided to run for president again on the Progressive or the Bull Moose Party, but he was not successful. After another trip out of country to Brazil to collect other specimens, Roosevelt died shortly after the completion of World War I in 1919. If we were to look at all of the leadership traits that we have studied, you could probably put Theodore Roosevelt in all of the leadership theories. That's how powerful of a leader he was. But we're going to look at 5 today that exemplify his type of leadership. And the first is the trait approach to leadership. Theodore Roosevelt could be considered one of the great men of leadership by his traits. And the first trait is his intelligence. Theodore Roosevelt was fluent in 3 languages. He could read in 3 more. He authored over 35 books. He was the first sitting president to author a book. It was said that he read 2 to 3 books every day. On busy days, he read 1. He wrote all of his own speeches and messages to Congress. He also showed extreme self-confidence. He said, "There's nothing brilliant or outstanding in my record except perhaps this one. Whatever I think is right for me to do, I do, and when I make up my mind to do a thing, I act." His action showed his self-confidence. When McKinley was trying to make peace with Cuba and Spain, Roosevelt was already assembling the Rough Riders. While Congress was debating what to do about the Panama Canal, Roosevelt had already bought the land to build the canal, took action, and went to visit the site where the canal was being built, becoming the first president to go out of country while in office. From the beginning of his political career, he quoted, "Speak softly and carry a big stick, you will go far." Roosevelt was also determined. From a young child, he had asthma, and his dad told him, "Roosevelt, you have to make your body do what your mind wants it to do." And his sister said, looking up, he threw back his head, and with a flash of those white teeth, he said, "I'll make my body." And from that time forth, he became one of the most physically strong presidents ever. Roosevelt was also a man of integrity. He fired over 200 corrupt police officers when he was head of the Board of Police Commissioners. As governor of New York, he ran on a ticket of honest government. He also demonstrated sociability. Every New Year's Day, people would stand in line at the White House to shake his hand. One author said, "You go to the White House, you shake hands with Roosevelt and hear him talk, and then go home to wring the personality out of your clothes." The second approach to leadership that Roosevelt showed was the skills approach. According to Nordhaus, the skills approach emphasizes three main competencies in a leader. And Roosevelt showed these competencies in many different situations, but we're going to look at them in one specific situation, how he demonstrated this at the Treaty of Portsmouth. First of all, he demonstrated knowledge. Roosevelt, as he looked at the war going on between Russia and Japan, his knowledge of both cultures and his knowledge of what was going on in the war was the driving force behind his invitation to even begin the peace talks. During the conference, his problem-solving skills were what led both sides to make concessions and what eventually led to the treaty. And his social judgment skills, it's been said that he wrote down that he thought that the Russian ambassador was a bore. But his social judgment skills kept him from acting on his own feelings about the two countries so that a treaty could be formed, and therefore he won the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1906. He was the first president to receive this honor. This was just one instance where the skills approach to leadership, where he used his skills to bring about leadership, and these skills were skills that he had developed. The third approach to leadership is the situational approach. Roosevelt said, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." And in his area of conservation, Roosevelt, he changed his approach to leadership to meet the needs of the situation. For example, sometimes he appealed in just introducing the idea of conservation to the American people, he appealed to the priority of democracy and of national wealth and prosperity. He stated the rights of the public to the natural resources outweigh private rights and must be given first consideration. But sometimes he demanded. When investors wanted to build hotels on the rim of the Grand Canyon, Roosevelt asked Congress to make the canyon a national park. When Congress refused, he simply demanded that the land be declared a national monument. Sometimes, though, he cooperated. He worked with Congress to add 5 more national parks and worked for the passing of the National Monuments Act in 1906. And then other times, he declared, after finding out that he could simply declare a portion of land a national wildlife refuge, he declared 50 other portions of land national wildlife refuges. He did in each situation, he changed his approach to meet the needs of the situation in order to protect America's natural resources and heritage. The fourth approach to leadership that Roosevelt used was the transformational approach. And we see this in his square deal proposals. Transformational leaders possess a certain charisma that positively affects their followers. One author said of Roosevelt, he had charisma, a gift for connecting with others on an emotional level and winning their hearts through his personality. Roosevelt, he went into the slums, he went into the factories, and he saw the plight of the people, and then he used his charismatic personality to bring about social reform, to fight for consumer protection, and to settle labor disputes. In many different situations, he was not afraid to use the threat of government intervention to settle labor and union disputes. He stated the Constitution was made for the people and not the people for the Constitution. As he wielded the big stick of leadership, the American people showed increased confidence, trust, and belief. And they showed this in the fact that they called him Teddy, even though it was a name he really did not like. The last form of leadership is servant leadership. This is a theory where the leader is one with strong morals who focuses on the idea that his job is to serve. Two of Roosevelt's favorite presidents were Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln because they were both strong leaders who believed the president was the people's chief servant. Roosevelt said, "Most of all, I believe whatever value my service may have comes even more from what I am than from what I do." We see Roosevelt's desire to serve the American people, as well as the desire to serve foreign countries. He believed that one job of the American people was to help those less fortunate and to educate the backward. We see how he did this when he expanded the Monroe Doctrine into the Roosevelt Corollary. He had such a desire to serve that when the United States entered World War I, he formed the Roosevelt Division, a unit of 20,000 men that he himself was going to lead, but he wasn't allowed to because of his age. He was a servant leader. Even though there's no evidence where we see a clear testimony of faith in Jesus Christ, Theodore Roosevelt applied biblical principles in his leadership. He applied the principle of servant leadership when he served America and other countries. He applied the principle of stewardship as he protected America's natural resources. He also applied the biblical principle that a leader needs to be a biblical example. As he was an example to the Rough Riders, he was an example to the police officers in New York, and he was an example to the American people which he served. On January 6, 1919, Roosevelt's son Archie commented, "The old lion is dead." Vice President Thomas Marshall remarked, "Death had to take him sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight." Theodore Roosevelt was a leader who was larger than life, a man of contradictions whose life can best be summed up by his own words. He said, "Only those are fit to live who do not fear to die, and none are fit to die who have shrunk from the joy of life and the duty of life. Both life and death are parts of the same great adventure."